A city in southeastern China trying to crack down on jaywalkers by publicly shaming them. That's according to local newspapers. The Beijing News. It reports the government installed these poles which spray mist at folks who try to cross when the light is red. The system uses facial recognition technology and takes jaywalkers' pictures. The pictures appear on a huge display screen in the street along with the people's names. There are also plans to link the system to cell phones so that offenders can receive fines via text message. I'm Trace Gallagher in for Shepard Smith. The Dow's down about 200 plus. Your World with Neil Cavuto right now.
All right, forget about what is in those Comey memos. Maybe it is what James Comey should have left out of those memos that could get him in some trouble. Reports today that at least 2 memos leaked by the former FBI director did in fact contain classified information, and now the Inspector General is on the hunt and looking into it. Welcome, everybody. Happy Friday. I'm Neil Cavuto. Well, Republicans still say that the memos will clear the president of any obstruction charge, but Democrats are saying just the opposite. Catherine Herridge, keeping on top of it all. Hey, Catherine.
Well, thank you, Neil. The president's critics point to a January 2017 memo that documented a private dinner between the president and James Comey a week after the inauguration, where they discussed the so-called loyalty pledge. Comey writes, he replied that he needed loyalty and expected loyalty. I did not reply or even nod or change my facial expression. We came back to it later. I replied that he would always get honesty from me. Trump paused and said, that's what he wants, honest loyalty. I replied, you will get that from me. Based on the memos and his book tour this week, the relationship between Comey and the president was stressed from the very beginning, after Comey briefed the incoming president on unverified malicious allegations in the so-called Trump dossier. The president's supporters point to a March 2017 memo where Mr. Trump tells Comey to find out if there really is any evidence of collusion with Russia. Comey writes, said that if there was some satellite, Comey notes, I took this to mean some associate of his or his campaign, that did something, it would be good to find out, but that he hadn't done anything and hoped I would find a way to get out that we weren't investigating him. On the classification issues, Comey testified in June 2017, that he went out of his way to avoid sensitive information so that the memos could be widely shared.
My thinking was, if I write it in such a way that I don't include anything that would trigger a classification, that'll make it easier for us to discuss within the FBI and the government, and to hold on to it in a way that makes it accessible to us.
But that testimony seems to be at odds with Comey's own memo documenting a meeting in early January 2017, and he acknowledges dealing specifically with classified matters in the memos. He writes, I am not sure of the proper classification here, so have chosen secret. That's a high level of classification. Please let me know if it should be higher or lower than that. And late today, Neil, Fox confirmed with a source who's familiar with the probe that the Inspector General at the Justice Department, so their internal watchdog, is investigating Comey's handling of the memos, including whether classified information was given to unauthorized outside sources. In this case, that would include the Columbia Law School professor. We were also told it's part of a broader review of Comey's communications outside of the Bureau to include his media contacts, Neil.
All right, Catherine, thank you very much.
You're
By the way,
welcome.
not just the memos here we're talking about. Fired FBI director, Deputy Director Andy McCabe said to be upset and disappointed after Comey signaled that he might have to testify against him. That prompted the president to tweet that Comey was throwing McCabe under the bus. Now both of these guys could be in some trouble. Ned Ryan is the CEO and founder of the American Majority. Ned, a lot of people told me that if you're the President of the United States, you just sit back and watch. There's no reason to even threaten the possibility of going to fire, Mueller or Rod Rosenstein at the White House. That there's no reason to do that now. Do you agree?
Well, I think we keep on seeing more of what we've seen in the last 48 hours. I think that's probably the right strategy as we start to see this thing unravel. I mean, the amazing thing about these Comey memos, Neil, is that we knew that at least one of the ones that he had leaked was classified. And we know that because of a letter that Chuck Grassley sent to Rod Rosenstein January 3rd of this year, in which Grassley was made to go into a SCIF by the FBI to read those 7 memos of Comey. And he said that 4 of them were classified, 3 were unclassified, and then later writes that Comey had leaked 4 of the 7 to Professor Richmond, the Columbia professor, so that he could leak those to the press. So we already knew that at least one of the memos of Comey had classified information in it. So to see Comey start to do this, his story is starting to fall apart. The other point I made yesterday in a piece for American Greatness, Neil, is I think it's also going to become clear that Comey was lying about not knowing what the source of the funding for the Steele dossier was. If you look at a piece from The Atlantic last month, it states that Christopher Steele knew in the summer of 2016 that Hillary and the DNC were actually funding his work. So you're going to tell me that Christopher Steele knew who was funding his work, but James Comey in the summer of 2016 didn't? I find that to be hard to believe.
All right. Well, in the meantime, now you have Comey and his former number two likely clashing in court, especially if this becomes a criminal matter. And that's what McCabe is concerned about here. How likely is that? And then where does that lead the investigation?
Well, I think both of them are actually in trouble. Obviously, the IG put forth criminal proceedings against McCabe. And I think what's actually happened, I've heard reports that Inspector General Horowitz was waiting to see how Comey's book tour went and what he was actually saying in his book before releasing his report on James Comey. So I think James Comey is going to have a lot of troubles of his own in the very near future.
You're probably definitely right about it. But let me go back to you mentioned Rod Rosenstein at the beginning here, and his comments to the president, I believe last Thursday, in which he said, you are not, a target in this Bob Mueller probe. Now, that sounds a little incredible to me that he would even volunteer that information with the president, or given it the benefit of the doubt, let's say that it might be true, would he also be trying to say or reassure the president to sort of suck him in and to build up his confidence here, get him to talk to Mueller and get set up here? What do you think?
Well, first of all, I don't think Trump needs to speak to Mueller. But Rosenstein's only reinforcing what Comey told Trump 3 times. You are not a target of the investigation.
Why would he volunteer? Why would he go to the White House to volunteer that information? You could make the signal when he was just fearful of his job. A lot of these guys do very well when they leave their job and do big books, so that you could cynically say that's not a factor. But to me, it just seemed almost too much of a setup. Am I too cynical?
Well, Rod Rosenstein, obviously, with all the talk about him potentially being fired by Trump, I looked at it as more of a CYA. Go to the White House, assure the president you're not under investigation, and hope that he can continue on with his job. That's how I looked at it, Neil. I didn't see it as anything else but that, reassuring the president that he is not a target of the investigation. But again,
but that's a moving target right there in and of itself, right? You might not be a moving target at the moment, but you could be, right?
It could be. Yeah. I mean, the amazing part to me right now, almost a year into this Mueller investigation, first of all, Rosenstein lacked the moral fortitude, should have said no to a special counsel, gave in to political pressure, should have let Congress do the investigations, and if there was any evidence of criminal or collusion, then spin up a special counsel. But we already know. House Intel has said there's no collusion. Rosenstein even admitted 2 months ago no Americans knowingly worked with the Russians. And so you start to see this investigation fall apart. The shame of it all as we sit here in April of 2018 is that if Rod Rosenstein had actually had some moral fortitude and James Comey hadn't been a vindictive, disgruntled former employee who wanted revenge for being fired, we would have saved ourselves a heck of a lot of time, a heck of a lot of money. The whole investigation's already $12 million in, but when you add up the 3 branches of government and the various departments, the real figure could be 10 to 20 times that, Neil.
Yeah, I mean, you should hear what the Democrats are saying about Comey, right? So it's a no-win situation. Ned Ryan, thank you very, very much. In the meantime, the Trump campaign is responding to the Democratic National Committee lawsuit, claiming that Trump campaign and Russia conspired to disrupt the 2016 election, saying that this is a sham lawsuit about a bogus Russian collusion claim filed by a desperate, dysfunctional, and nearly insolvent Democratic Party. So I don't think they're fans of their lawsuit. Anyway, attorneys Lisa Giovinazzo here and Jesse Weber. Lisa, where is this particular thing going? It's going to be an aggressive back and forth on who knew what and when and who shared that with the press, blah, blah, blah.
Well, it's going to be very aggressive, and it's interesting, the timing, right? Because now we see this lawsuit and we see Trump hire a whole new array of attorneys.
And separately, by the way, Andy McCabe going after.
Yes.
But go ahead.
Yes, but I think what you're going to see is a lot of motion practice. I think you're going to see Trump's team, especially not so much Giuliani, but this Jane and Marty Raskin, perhaps file an order to show cause, try to get that information that was taken from Cohen's office, the attorney-client privilege, sent back to Trump, so that can't be used in the DNC.
Who has seen that? Who do you think has seen that information taken from Michael Cohen's offices and/or home?
Well, I hope the proper taint team will, because any kind of litigation, you need the proper team to look at this material and say, wait a second, First of all, is this
But
about...
who looks at it? When you raid an office, who looks at it?
You need an independent team. You need a team that's not associated
No,
with
I
either
understand
party.
that, but who would normally do it? The FBI raided, right?
Right. So you would probably be consisting of different attorneys, people that are familiar with this practice.
Does it even get
Should
that
be
far?
the Southern District Attorney's Office, but actually even before that, and I think that's what you saw with the injunction, was they wanted very specific people to see the information. Again, it is a violation of privilege, and we haven't actually seen what was requested. We don't know what the search warrant actually even retrieved. But I think now that Trump is gearing up with his team, I think he's hired self-proclaimed attorneys who say that they are experts at returning privileged documents, thousands of pages that are used in litigation that have been returned as...
Well, last Thursday is when Rosenstein met at the White House, right, and talked to the president. So the raid had already happened at Michael Cohen's business, offices and home. Would that have come up in this discussion? And if Rosenstein, it's a stretch for me at least to believe that he said this, but he could have. I mean, Bloomberg, they're a sound news organization. They reported. I have no doubt that their sources are probably impeccable. But if he volunteered to the president, you are not a target of this investigation. Is he saying that post the raid, that even what little they got days after the raid, that he could say that, or did that change with the raid?
I think he's never. I think he's not a target. He's a subject, and I think a subject can become a target.
Who would share that?
I think the important thing to remember here is that he is doing this to add validity to this raid. Many people question, why did this raid happen? Because to raid an attorney's office is not a simple matter. It's a very complex and serious issue here. You don't just raid an attorney's office, and people question that. And if they come back with absolutely nothing after reviewing these files, and remember, we have to look at the non-privileged communications between Mr. Trump and Cohen. Maybe there's something. But if they come back with nothing...
Does Rosenstein know what came of that office raid?
I'm sure he's in communication, and I'm sure he has an idea, but nobody knows until they review it.
Let's say it goes to the White House, wouldn't it be incumbent upon the president, who's apoplectic over this raid and still stewing about it, and justifiably so, if you hear from his people, and wants to know, well, what the hell were they up to? And Rosenstein is trying to calm him down to say, nothing there?
Well, he kind of has to, right? Because Cohen's office was raided, and the attorney-client privilege doesn't apply to Cohen, but it still does apply to Trump.
But if you're the president, and every communication and dealing you've had with your personal lawyer over these many years is now in God knows whose hands.
But is it about legal advice?
But it's not public.
Right.
It's not public. And the fact, that's again why you're seeing this team come in and say we're experts at retrieving thousands of pages of documents that have been utilized in these kind of investigations.
Guys? Just help me with this. I mean, if indeed, at face value, for the umpteenth time we hear the president is not a target, what is he?
So, well, he could be a subject. He could be a further witness.
Can a subject become a target?
Yes.
Absolutely. We don't know what's going to happen yet, but what we do know is that they have some serious issues with Mr. Cohen that could be anything from bank fraud to campaign finance violations. They believe they have something very strong. Otherwise, this would have never, ever happened.
But the Department of Justice has come out and said we cannot indict a sitting president. We now have Giuliani involved in the campaign, probably a perfect choice for posturing.
He's apparently convinced this can get wrapped up in a couple of weeks.
Well, also, let's see. We were just talking about the fact that it's been going on for a year. It's getting closer and closer to a next election cycle. You do have an expert who actually was a candidate in federal prosecutor.
Well, I'm going to say this also, going back to the DNC lawsuit. The timing's amazing because as the Mueller probe slows down and maybe Giuliani is able to negotiate with Mueller, you go to a civil court system where the standard of the burden of proof is much lower and they can go after what they want to go after.
Well, but
it'll
be pulled back, though, through the privilege. He will institute privilege, I think, prevail.
You guys are brilliant, but I'm more confused than ever. But not because of you guys.
I think most people are.
You're very good at this. Thank you both very, very much.
Thank you.
All right, Gates, you were looking at the corner of Wall and Broad today, and what we're showing you in the bottom portion of your screen, the Dow down over 200 points today as interest rates continue to move higher. In fact, they're at 4-year highs right now. There are a lot of worries as well that that's going to keep going up, 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 and the sort of crescendo level seems to be 3%. Get up to that on a 10-year note, and all of a sudden, Katie barred the door. I should point out that those are historically low rates. There was a time when the 10-year note was fetching in excess of 10%. But if you're used to near like 2%, 1.8%, this is an adjustment. And Wall Street hates to adjust. A little more to this. All right, just in case you're waiting for the official coronation of Michael Pompeo as the new Secretary of State, you might have to wait and wait a while. In fact, it's not a guarantee right now with some of the maneuvers going on Capitol Hill that it's even going to happen. How the heck that happened is beyond me, but Rich Edson knows. He's at the State Department with more. Hey, Rich.
Hi, good afternoon, Neil. And the Senate Foreign Relations Committee is scheduled to consider Pompeo's nomination on Monday. Kentucky Senator Rand Paul opposes his nomination. He's the only Republican on the committee to do so. Paul met with Pompeo yesterday one-on-one, but his office says that meeting has not changed his mind. Pompeo and the opposition from Paul could be enough to deny Pompeo at least a sign-off from the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. However, he did get significant support yesterday from one Democrat, Heidi Heitkamp. She's the Democrat from North Dakota. She is the only Democrat now to come out in the Senate and say that she plans on voting for Mike Pompeo as Secretary of State. That's something that's pretty vital here when you consider the Senate is very close, and her support could be enough to get him through the U.S. Senate. But again, Neil, you got to see when the votes happen and when they take place. 15 senators in the Democrats caucus voted for Mike Pompeo as CIA director, though those opposing him say they fear that he'll fail to provide a check on the president's worst impulses. Republicans say that Pompeo has the trust of the president of the United States. He's already executing the president's foreign policy, and that his trip to North Korea on Easter weekend demonstrates both that. Neil?
All right, thank you, my friend. Rich Edson at the State Department. What's going to happen now? Retired Lieutenant Army Colonel James Carfano. You know, I always thought there was at times, or, you know, whatever you thought about the president, you gave him wide latitude in picking his team, particularly at this level of the team, the Secretary of State. But they're going to keep this dangling at a time we already know that he's met with the North Korean leader, and there's some very delicate things going on right now. What do you think of all this?
Look, I think it's a kabuki dance. I think in the end they'll vote. And look, I do policy, not politics, so what do I know? But my guess is in the end there'll be the votes to pass this thing. I mean, if you just listen to some of the criticisms, they're incredibly just fatuous. We have to protect against the president's worst impulses. Well, if that's true, then John Kerry would have never gotten one vote as Secretary of State under Barack Obama.
I'm just wondering where this goes and how it would be seen in the eyes of the rest of the world that we still technically don't have a Secretary of State. We have an acting Secretary of State. I understand that. But this is a crucial moment. He is the point person to set up the parameters of that meeting with the North Korean leader, as he did over Easter weekend. How would he be limited without full authority as Secretary of State to move forward?
I don't think it's a big problem. And again, I think he'll be voted through. And the reality is once you're the Secretary of State, you're the Secretary of State, and the votes are irrelevant. Colin Powell was approved by a unanimous voice vote, and he had some great challenges as Secretary of State. So it's done and it moved on. But you raise a really important point. We are coming up on maybe the most critical 90 days of this administration, because a lot of people miss the point. Last year, the president laid down all the basic policies. So the new team isn't coming in to rewrite the policies. They're coming in to execute the policies. And right off the bat, we have, okay, what do we do now in Syria? What do we do about the Iran deal? What do we do in this meeting with Rocket Man? And then we have the NATO summit. So all that's coming in one fell swoop. By the time we get to July, we're going to have a really good feel for how this team is at executing Trump's foreign policy.
While I have you, I was curious, James, what you made of the concession, if you want to call it that, on the part of the North Koreans, that they're no longer demanding that we remove our troops stationed in South Korea. I believe that in excess of 50,000 of them from the Korean Peninsula. That is not an early demand. What did you make of that?
Well, I can't use the kabuki dance analogy because I just can't, process that quick. But the reality is, North Korean diplomacy is like a football field, and if they cross one goal line, they're in a war. And if they cross the other, the reconciliation, denuclearization, and the survival of the regime is you can't cross either goal line. So all they do is run back and forth, and it's just part of that.
I like the kabuki, the goal line thing. You covered everything. Thank you very, very much, James. Have a good weekend, a safe weekend.
See you, my friend.
All right, we're back to the crumbs analogy and back to opposing tax cuts, and Democrats say it is going to be a winning message, or at least Nancy Pelosi thinks so. Is she right? After this.
As we saw, the tax scam adds, again, over $2 trillion to the deficit. While the Republicans were saying, oh, it'll pay for itself, we know that it doesn't. Just ask Bruce Bartlett. Anyone who says that these tax cuts pay for themselves is It's not true, it's nonsense, and it's BS.
Of course, you know, to be fair, I don't know where you stand on this. We're only 4 months into the whole tax cut thing, but, you know, not even 3 months if you think about it. Of course, you know, she's worried about deficits and debt. That's fine. Of course, it piled up a lot during the prior administration. But again, we're just splitting hairs. The president reacting to this, tweeting, Nancy Pelosi is going absolutely crazy about the big tax cuts given to the American people by the Republicans, got not one Democrat vote. So will slamming the tax cuts be a strategy that backfires on Democrats in November? It really depends on with whom you chat, I guess. And we've got quite a few interesting characters today, some of my favorites, including Jenna Caldwell. We've got political commentator Danielle McLaughlin and market watcher Heather Zamaraga. All right, so let's get a sense, Gianno, from you how that message will resonate, because there must be something to it, because Nancy Pelosi keeps saying it. We see Cory Booker in New Jersey pounding it. They're looking at this blue wave. They're convinced that pounding these tax cuts is a winner for them. And and when they promise to rescind them, it's going to be a winner for them. What do you say?
I disagree wholeheartedly, and it's interesting to me that Nancy Pelosi, who's worth $30 million, by the way, called tax reform crumbs, but yet called legislation extending a $40 payroll tax cut in 2011 a victory for all Americans and attributed to the Obama's leadership. I believe Democrats realize that they made a tactical error here. Instead of sitting at the table and negotiating tax reform with Republicans so they can at least take some of the credit, they resisted, thereby resisting the prosperity of the American people. With over 80% of Americans receiving a benefit of tax reduction from their tax bill and millions in bonuses received, Democrats have no choice but to attempt to play the American people as stupid, similarly as Hillary Clinton did in the 2016 election, and she attempted. The American people clearly know better, and they can see their paychecks and see the ramifications of a GOP majority.
Heather, though, maybe they're not seeing it. I mean, there's a Wall Street Journal report out earlier this week that showed that, you know, the support for this hit a ceiling after rising initially. Maybe it could be as simple as a lot of people don't have pay stubs anymore. Their checks are directly deposited. They don't see it, or to the degree that they might otherwise have seen it in the past. I don't know what it is, but something doesn't appear to be resonating. Should Republicans worry?
Yeah, I'm not a wealthy individual, but I see more money in my paycheck than I did last year, that's for sure. So a simple, clear message from the Republican Party going into the midterms on how this is benefiting the economy in terms of unemployment at 4.1%, in terms of wages increasing. I think that will be important in order for Republicans to win the midterms. And if Democrats want to win the midterms, Neil, they actually need to give the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act some credit here.
I don't know where that's going, Danielle. I do know the plan right now of Nancy Pelosi is that Democrats take over. They're going to rip them up and start from scratch. Is that a wise strategy? Because Republicans can quickly counter, well, the Democrats are going to raise your taxes.
Sure. I mean, I think the message from the Democrats is that this tax cut was a huge tax cut and a giveaway for corporate America. And we see that with the millions and billions of dollars in share buybacks that most of Americans are not going to benefit from, because only about half of Americans own shares. We look at last quarter.
But a lot of them are getting bonuses, and that improving market does, today notwithstanding, lift their own 401ks and other things and provide a lot of communities benefits and services.
Only half of Americans have either direct or indirect ownership in the stock market. The big six banks in the last quarter made $3.6 billion.
Half Americans is a lot of Americans.
No, it is. But what about the other half? What about the other half? I think one of the things about the tax cuts.
So you don't buy the fact that 90% of Americans are getting some relief from this that they weren't getting before?
I don't. And what Pelosi is trying to say is that it's a relative argument. Yes, we are seeing some improvement across many Americans, but it's corporate America, including pass-through corporations.
Fair enough. Gianno, that does seem to be a point that's been pounded again and again, that said it could be even more, and these greedy companies are just pouring in a stock and doing all that stuff. How do they answer?
Well, we've seen these quote-unquote greedy companies begin to give bonuses, raise wages for their employees, and hire more people. We saw companies all across the world who said, look, we want to bring jobs back to America. So when we talk about America First priorities, like President Trump mentions, this tax plan is doing exactly that. Now, again, it may not be perfect. We know that people in California, New York, New Jersey, and I believe Maryland they got hit a little bit over the head with it, and I understand that, but over 80% of Americans are receiving a benefit, and I think that's something that we can definitely champion. Now, to your earlier point on why it isn't resonating, the GOP has to sell it better, and I think that's what's missing. But it's kind of hard to do so.
Heather, I think
when
you
you
would
get
have
President
to
Trump with the tweets in here and there.
Well, no, they're horrible at that, and they're not explaining this. I mean, Ronald Reagan was famous for saying, "Would you rather the money in your hands or the government's?" And then sometimes the simpler the better, and they're getting tied up in knots.
I think what Democrats need. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Heather.
I think it is important. While only half Americans own stocks, the other half should see the stock market as a gauge of the economy and how well the economy is doing. That's important.
Well, we'll see.
It does matter.
It depends on the day, guys. Guys, I want to thank you very much. By the way, the president has just sent out another tweet here talking about maybe the coverage of all of this stuff, saying that, can you believe that despite 93% bad stories from the fake news media, should be getting good stories? Today, we had just about our highest poll numbers, including those on Election Day. The American public is wise to the phony and dishonest press and make America great again. We'll be back again after this. How much can one state bear? 2 Florida sheriff deputies shot and killed while eating at a restaurant on the same day we got word of another attempted school shooting today. Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi is here next. What happened here? 2 sheriff deputies shot and killed in Florida yesterday while eating at a restaurant. The attacker was found dead shortly thereafter. But what prompted any of this? Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi joins us right now. Sorry to have you here under these circumstances, but what do we know about this shooting? Anything new?
Neil, it's been really unreal. To set the stage for you, Gilchrist County, it's a small county. It's like a hometown county. They have very few deputies. Sheriff Bobby Schultz obviously is distraught, as well as his entire force. And we had 2 deputies, Deputy Taylor Lindsay and Sergeant Noel Ramirez. He had just gotten promoted to sergeant, sitting in a restaurant, glass front, having lunch, about 3 o'clock. And someone came in and just didn't even come in the restaurant, through the window, assassinated both deputies, and then took his own life.
So he didn't go into the restaurant, but he saw them. He was clearly marking them and shot them from outside.
What everyone's saying now is they were ambushed. And, you know, Neil, this is what's so important for all your great viewers out there to know. Sergeant Ramirez had 2 small children, a 5-year-old son and a 3-year-old daughter.
Oh my gosh.
And we have been working with GoFundMe, who they are amazing corporate partners, to set up, it's not up yet, but to hopefully set up a trust for these 2 kids. So if your viewers are watching, that will hopefully be up soon, and it will be under the shooting Noel Ramirez, Sergeant Ramirez. But that's not up yet. But we're working on that. And Neil, when this happened, this is what Florida does so well together. About 12 neighboring sheriffs all came in to Gilchrist to help with this and to be there. All these other sheriffs to help emotionally support Sheriff Schultz, and as well as my advocates, my victim advocates, have been with the families all day today.
Do we know anything more about this, Ellen, if we're going on the assumption that he killed himself? Anything about him, or what his beef was with law enforcement, or anything else?
And Neil, I don't, and this is just me, I don't know this from law enforcement. It's a very small community, and I think everybody knew each other. But I'm going to wait and let law enforcement, of course, release that when the investigation's completed. But, you know, that, of course, wasn't the only. This was horrific, but of course another event happened in Florida.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to ask you about, this school shooting, or what could have been an awful school event. Update me on that.
So Sheriff Billy Woods, who is a great sheriff, he was in Gilchrist County because, of course, he's friends with Sheriff Bobby Schultz, and he was there adding emotional support when he got a call that there was an active school shooting in Ocala. And he asked me to tell you that Deputy Jimmy Long, not only is he a 25-year deputy, he is a school resource officer at this school, and that school is so blessed that he was there. And the Governor Scott also had Deputy Jimmy Long on his commission. That's how good this deputy was, this
what
SRO,
happened at this school?
training other people.
I'm sorry, but what happened at this school?
A student brought a gun to school.
Right.
A student brought a gun to school, and another student was shot. The other student's going to be fined. Within 3 minutes, this SRO, school resource officer, Jimmy Long, and the principal, they heard the shot, and you know what they did? They ran to the shot, and they apprehended him, Neil, within 3 minutes. So in all of our books, Deputy Jimmy Long is a true hero, as well as that principal at the school. And the young student, he's 17, who was shot, is going to be fine.
I was just going to ask. I'm glad to hear that. Now, obviously, yours state is the first in the nation, thanks to Governor Rick Scott, to put in new policies to deal with guns and who holds them, who can get them at a certain age, and we're pushing it up to 21 to get a lot of the assault weapons were common in a lot of attacks, including in your state earlier in the year. Did that help the situation today? Did that come into play at all?
At the school shooting, Neil, I think we just happened to have a deputy there, a school resource officer, who had been trained very well, and that's thanks to Sheriff Wood's training, and he had been trained through law enforcement. My office had participated in that. A 25-year veteran who was not scared. That's what law enforcement officers do. They run to harm, not away from it. And that's why, back to those 2 murdered deputies today, they were ambushed. You know, it's heartbreaking. There is no normal day for a law enforcement officer. When we see a law enforcement officer, their family members, the men and women in uniform, we have to thank them for what they do every day to keep all of us safe.
Pam Bondi, thank you very much. Sergeant Noel Ramirez, 30 years old. Deputy Taylor Lindsay, 25 years old. They're both dead, just doing their job. A little more to this. All right, I think James Comey has a book out. Anyway, a lot of people are talking about it. He's appeared everywhere. I think he did a one-on-one with Dora the Explorer, which was that one I didn't see coming. Anyway, a lot of people talking about it. Is his credibility, you know, on the mark, not on the mark? Now with his former number 2, now saying, well, he lied about him. The back and forth. Well, you know, and I worry enough about how we in the news media cover this, but I need to keep on top of what, well, America's restless young people are thinking about it. So now, kids, let's go right to it. Fox contributor Kat Timpf is here. We got Your World audio technician Dion Baya, Campus Reform's Cabot Phillips. Love that name, Cabot Phillips. My good man. And the Wall Street Journal's Jillian Melcher. Beautiful names all. All right, so Cabot, on this whole debate, back and forth, did James Comey obviously sell a lot of books, but did you believe what he was saying?
I think you'd be hard-pressed to find most young people that are paying attention to this, let alone even believing or not believing what he's saying. I think most young people, they care about paying off student loans, getting a job, taxes. They're not looking at former government employees and their, grasp at relevance and thinking, this really impacts my life on a daily basis. And even if they are paying attention, I think they're seeing a lot of hypocrisy. They're seeing a guy that's going, oh, I really hate the limelight. I don't want all these eyes on me. Now let me get on every single TV show and go on every show and get the limelight. He clearly loves it.
I've been reading the book this week, and it's really funny. He's got this part where he's talking about how one of the greatest battles he ever won was against his ego. And I just want the Arrested Development narrator to go, he did not win the battle against his ego. I mean, the book sounds like it was written in gel pen. It's just unintentionally really funny, and I think it's a pretty accurate insight into what's going on in Washington.
But now, young people, by and large, were a Democratic monolith. They voted they're largely liberal. I don't know who you guys are, nor do I care. But they're angry. They don't like the president. And this guy was the guy who had awful things to say about the president. So I would think that a lot of young people would pounce at this and welcome it.
It is pretty boring, though. Did you see? The interviews are boring. I've been watching all the interviews, and not once have I been, wow, I'm so captivated. No, I just say, hey, here's a dude who really wants the spotlight, who really wants to cash in, and I have a prediction. within the next couple of years, Dancing with the Stars. He'll be on.
Really?
Yeah.
It's not a bad move, but I mean, but what do you
I think the segment of the millennials who are listening to this are getting their news from partisan sites, or shows like The Daily Show or the late night shows, and then they are against him and they're against the president. They don't like what they're seeing, so I think they are getting the hoorah.
Well, the whole investigation that's going on, guys, do you pay attention? There was a lot of talk that, everything went full circle with the number one and the number two former FBI guys kind of at each other's throats here, giving different accounts of stories. And then, this idea that maybe this whole thing is out of control, the investigation, where it's going, who's reliable, what.
And it's tough for people who aren't really paying attention to even keep up with the narrative. If someone hasn't really paying attention, they check in every once in a while. A year ago, it's Comey's the absolute worst. We should hate him. He ruined the election for us. He rigged it in Trump's favor. 6 months later, Comey's the best. Now he's going after Trump. He's really sticking it to him. 6 months later, I don't really know what we think about him.
I don't think
no one can make up their mind.
I don't think anybody really cares of this age demographic, and if they do, they're just so done with it. And I think it's just bringing the collective morale of the country down, and we just must be such a laughingstock overseas to just see what are the Americans doing now? They're openly mocking their president. They're mocking their president on TV. It's just
I don't know. I actually do think people care. It was kind of interesting the night the McCabe thing went down. I was in the grocery store. And it was fascinating watching grocery clerks my age get alerts on their phone and then have a very heated political discussion about it. So I do think people are paying attention.
In the grocery store?
I did. It was
He did go from a hero that collected a $500,000 legal fund as part of it, and now all of a sudden he's a pariah.
I think what's so sad about this, though, is that it's doing lasting damage to the FBI and to our institutions. And this is a question of law and order.
Okay, let me switch gears. Are any of you Prime subscribers at Amazon?
Oh, yeah. I am their biggest customer.
Yeah, you're like,
All right, so 100 million of you. Yeah. 100 million. And so Amazon's on fire. It's recouped a lot of its losses when the president was targeting it. What do you think of that? I mean, that it's a juggernaut, but now it's clearly a juggernaut.
It makes perfect sense. I can get paper towel delivered. I can get toilet paper delivered. I can get apples delivered. I can get anything delivered. And you just mentioned having a political discussion in a grocery store. I don't want to do that. I don't want to have any discussions in the grocery store. If a company allows me...
I see around here, you don't like to talk to anyone. So.
I can, I'm actually very social, but I don't like to be social when I'm shopping.
But I mean, the president's been targeting Amazon, taking advantage of, post office workers and all that other stuff and all. But I'm looking at all the...
Well, I think he makes good
they're raising money left and right.
He makes good points about the kind of the dire straits the post office is currently in. But if you look at Amazon,
that's not Amazon's fault.
I know it's not Amazon's fault, but the incentive with Amazon is that some of the stuff like pantry is half off that you go see in the store. It's delivered to your doorstep. You don't have to deal with it.
So I guess what I'm asking you guys then, to that point, then the president's going after Jeff Bezos, and cynically I think because he also personally owns the Washington Post.
Losing battle.
I think it's a bad.
I'm not going to the store for paper towels.
Don't take our beloved Amazon. That's what people are saying. Look, you could tell most young people that Amazon is harvesting, baby seal organs and burning down rainforests, and as long as they get their Prime subscription, they don't really care.
This
is not a winning battle for the president. It's a dangerous president too. If you care about the free market, you don't want the leader of the free world.
I want to go right to this because sorry to jump into the cab, but there was a case of a bad date. I don't know if you heard about this. A man in Indiana sending a woman an itemized invoice for a dinner date after she stopped texting him. The woman posted the invoice to social media, but has since deleted it. Kat, what do you think?
I think that that's absolutely crazy. I've gone out on dates before where guys have paid for stuff and it didn't work out, and that's bananas. But if I were her, I probably would just pay him, because if you're that desperate for $40, then something's really going on in your life.
This guy seems a little creedmoor.
He seems very, very scary.
Well, I wonder if we only are getting half of the story. If they went on the first date and she said to him, hey, you know what, thanks for getting the first check, I'll get the next one, and then she completely ghosts him, and then maybe he is a little pissed.
It's $40.
It's still money's money.
I don't know. Like, dating is a risk. That shows me that he's risk averse and that he has commitment issues because he's not willing to put some money behind
the collection agency again.
And also control it.
I wish we had more time. Blessedly, we do not. We'll have more after this. All right, you are looking live at St. Martin's Church in Houston, where former First Lady Barbara Bush is lying in repose. Members of the public have been gathering to pay their respects, and quite a few of them. They also had a chance to see a former president while they were at it. Fox News correspondent Mike Emanuel is there with more. Hey, Mike.
Well, Neil, good afternoon. There's been a steady stream of people here at St. Martin's Episcopal Church in Houston paying their respects to an extraordinary life. The wife of the 41st president and the mother of the 43rd. There was a very sweet moment this afternoon when former President George Herbert Walker Bush came into the church to pay his respects with his daughter Doro. They also stopped to thank the people who turned out to pay their respects to his wife. Those attending the viewing are leaving with a card that has a picture of First Lady Barbara Bush wearing her favorite color blue and her signature pearls. It also has a thank you from the Bush family for their prayers and friendship, and a quote from the First Lady that says, "The things that matter are faith, family, and friends." We've been asking people here what Mrs. Bush meant to them.
She became a Texan, and when they ultimately ended up here in Houston, wherever she planted her roots, she bloomed and blossomed things around in and around her. And she was an inspiration for Houstonians, Texans, as well as, you know, the United States and globally as well.
There are expected to be 3 eulogies given in tomorrow's funeral. We are told Mrs. Bush herself picked her son, Jeb Bush, the former Florida governor, to deliver the speech on behalf of the family. It's expected to be about a 90-minute funeral service here with about 1,500 dignitaries on hand. Neil?
Including Melania Trump, I understand, and a couple of former presidents and their spouses. Amazing. All right, thank you very, very much, my friend. Of course, so we will be all over this, of course, on this network, beginning at 10 a.m. Tomorrow on Cavido Live, right through Shepherd at noon, and into the proceedings that will take us to 3 p.m. Again, remembering a First Lady and a time where you could speak your mind and do it irreverently and still inspire Democrats and Republicans, people of all political stripes, remembering Barbara Bush tomorrow.